we're constantly inundated with this whole idea that we don't have enough, that we need to constantly worry and be in fear about something's going to happen, blah, 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 blah. And it's difficult for people to take a risk because when you're constantly in this, like, I don't know what's going to happen, and here's all the things that could go wrong, why would you ever venture into the unknown? Whereas if you ventured into the unknown with like, what's all the things that could go right, and even if some things do go wrong, what if I discover one or two things that could go right? What if I learn something new?
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte, identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles so that you can claim your own path and make your life a work of art.
Hey, 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 hey. Oh man, sometimes you start out with a hey, hoping that it's gonna like some other words are gonna come, and then they just don't. Yeah. This was one of those times. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for listening in on the podcast today. We're continuing a little bit of a tradition of kind of just jumping in and seeing what happens. Almost like, we come from acting backgrounds, so it's like going back to improv roots. Let's just do this thing. We do have kind of an idea of what we're exploring today. And it's based on definitely, for myself, some personal things and some decisions and choices and directions that I've made recently. So I'm sure we'll get into that. A couple of words swirling around for me right now are, principles in practice, which is something that I'm learning about, and in many ways, making leaps of faith as well. Brandon, I know that in this conversation, you're interested in, getting into, sometimes we have to do things that go against sort of the status quo and things like that. Things that don't quite align with how things have been done or how perhaps things are expected to be done. So there's a lot of territory, and these things are all related to each other, I think, in this conversation. So I'm looking forward to getting into this one. Brandon, you got a few things to set the table with?
Well, I would say that what you shared before we started the conversation, you shared just a little brief bit about, I'm excited to investigate that and look into that and kind of talk about how that might expose a little bit of why going against common thought or common practices is not only an artistic thing or a creative approach to life, but also a really advantageous option. I think there's something about this conversation which is creating room for an experimental element of discovering what is possible, because I think that there's a mistake made where we come into things, and I think it's a lot to do with our education system. I think our education system sets us up poorly for our best selves. I think it sets us up in certain ways which are good, don't get me wrong, but I think for the most part, the real special parts of us, it doesn't actually set us up very well. And it's not exactly the education fault, because education is standardized and it needs to be standardized to try and create a consistency and a regularity and a reliability or dependability, and making sure that everybody kind of comes out with essentially very similar things.
Yeah.
But I think that as adults, and hopefully adults that inspire this into children, is that, that's basic. That's your basic need. But there's more to life than what you basically need. It's not just about having the basics. It's about thriving. It's about exploring that unknown, that territory of potential. And there isn't really standardized programs, at least not at this stage in our evolution as humankind. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're kind of talking about is we're talking about beyond basics. We're talking about what are the options beyond basics, and that's going to require experiment, exploration, discovery, risk, going against status quo ideas sometimes, and sometimes going against what you basically know and actually doing the opposite of it, because there's this rule in screenwriting, which I'll kind of try to parallel it to, is that in screenwriting, you learn the rules so you can break the rules. But until you've learned the rules, breaking the rules is not very advantageous usually, because you don't know what you're breaking. You don't know what it does. You don't understand the cause and effect. But once you learn the rules really well, you actually, to move from semi-professional into professional is actually about learning how to break those rules. And you see that with like a Tarantino or a Scorsese or, someone like that, right? So I think that's kind of what we're talking about. If that's my best kind of input into this. So
no, the rule breaking, that's a great word, I think, that you've brought into this conversation. And interestingly enough, I'm about halfway through my second watching of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's almost better the second time around.
Oh, it is. Yeah, I rewatched it recently too. Yeah,
it breaks so many conventions. Even though in many ways, like there's so many tips of the hat to other movies and other shows in it. There's just still something that's so unquestionably original about it. And like just the way that it structures and weaves this tapestry of this thing, it goes against pretty much how everyone makes movies today. At least big movies today. And like the rule breaking, it's so funny because we live in this kind of conflict with ourselves around that, because on the one hand, we idolize rule breakers. We hold up rule breakers on a pedestal for a lot of the things they end up accomplishing, because they've had to break rules in order to move something forward, in order to, that's how you change the game in a lot of ways, is it can only come through breaking those rules. But usually it's an intelligent breaking of the rules. As you said, it's a mindful understanding of how you're doing it when you're doing it. And we idolize it. And so many of, like, we're talking about movies and stories, so many of like our stories of the heroes are people who went against the grain, broke the rules, and we admire it so much. But then when it comes into practice, when it comes into actual day-to-day life, rule breakers are often shat upon for a period of time, and that's there's a number of reasons for that. Rule breakers upset kind of our security to a certain extent, because the rules are a kind of security blanket that we have for ourselves, and anything that upsets that security blanket is, immediately questioned. And it's not wrong to question it, but maybe we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about what you're talking about as far as rule breakers, because there's a lot of rules. Some of them are more clearly set, and some of them are kind of more unconscious or subconscious rules that we live with, which we could maybe call conditioning, right? Like I know I'm talking a bit here, but you're talking about education and I don't know what I was going to say, but it's like, it's great that we have education, but as you said, it doesn't necessarily foster a person really figuring out who they are, which is arguably what we're all here to do. Like fundamentally is to, almost any spiritual tradition would say that, hey, fundamentally, we're here to learn who we are. You're here to learn who that person that you call self is. Beyond anything else. And so education can definitely help us find certain things about ourselves, but it doesn't necessarily directly facilitate that. It's can get a little bit bogged down in fitting in. It can get a little bit bogged down into, being a cog in the machine, a brick in the wall, to use all of these things. And, we need to have certain things that we come together on as a society. We live in societies and we rely on each other, and that we have to acknowledge that and we have to respect that. But as you said, there's something more too. There's that other component that needs to be honored and explored as well.
I think, okay, so kind of to add into what you're saying there, I think what's really important about rule breaking or bending is that people understand that you can do it when it's not like an ego thing. It's there's actually a lot of room to bend and break rules when it's not about like self-serving ego. I don't care about anybody else. I just care about myself, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. When you come at it from that, rule breaking and rule bending is mostly frowned upon. And that's why we have rules in a lot of ways, because we don't want people to be selfish assholes, right? Like we don't want that in this society, in this culture. And I think that's a fair thing for anybody to ask who is kind of like status quo rules, keep the general, like toe the line, kind of do this, right? But the thing is if you come at it from a place of ethics, when you come at it from a place of principle, when you come at it from a place of a deeper understanding of why the rule is there in the first place, and you kind of look at it like, okay, what does this rule uphold? And is there a way around that without like letting go of what it upholds? So for example, when I was a younger man, well, and we're always younger when we tell a story, but I was younger. Anyway, I sped, and in my car, in my vehicle, I sped. And anyway, there was this development in Vancouver where I think that the city planners didn't really think about fully what they were doing. They created basically, which is kind of a road with a couple lanes, which is a pretty fast road, which is supposed to only be 50 kilometers, right? And then two merge lanes, one on the left, one on the right, that come in at the exact same time you go under kind of an overpass into an area where not too far past these two merging lanes kind of coming into where people are trying to push through the middle, there's a turning lane not too far ahead. So for you to navigate this area, not only do you have to deal with traffic merging from two sides, so you have to be able to look over your left and over your right, and you've got 4 lanes you go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes of traffic. Not only that, but the road bends around a corner, so you can't necessarily see the next side. And then there's a turning lane that comes up, right? So it's complicated.
A clusterfuck of road design.
Clusterfuck of a design. They actually changed this. And I think that I have this sneaking suspicion that might have actually been changed because of an argument that I made in a court, because I sped in this thing, right? Well, anyway, I was coming through the area and I had to merge left, and I had to go around this corner, and then I had to take a left. And right when I went past the merge lane into this kind of rounded road where I was about to have to take a left and deal with that, there was a police officer there, and he pulled me over and he said, "You're speeding." And so I was like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. I wasn't even speeding that much. And I'm like, I was driving safe. So anyway, when I went into court to argue this ticket, the judge said, okay, now you can cross-reference the officer. And so when I cross-referenced the officer, I said, I want to ask you this. Is it better to never speed and take an accident, or is it better to speed to avoid an accident? And obviously, being a good police officer, he has to say it's better to avoid the accident, because the whole reason why we have speeding in the first place is to avoid accidents. So I said, look, I was speeding, but I was doing it mindfully. And I explained the situation as I did to you guys here, to the judge and to the court. And I said, look, this is a complicated area. And yes, I sped when I was older, and I took those tickets, and I never complained about them. I paid them. But I'm going to tell you right now, that I was speeding, but I was speeding mindfully and I was doing it, and the judge
Yeah.
sided with me and I got to walk out and I didn't have to pay the ticket. And the thing is that, yeah, technically I broke a rule. But the thing is why does the rule exist in the first place? What are we trying to do here? And I think a really important part of this for artists to understand, and whether you're a screenwriter or whether you're an actor or whether you're a painter, there's rules in place. They're trying to do something, but sometimes the rule actually hinders your ability to do what the rule is trying to do. So you need to break the rule. You need to bend the rule. So
it's like a general thing, like, and like it's a sort of speeding and speed limits are kind of a nice little example of this, because in general, the speed limits exist because it keeps people safe.
Yes.
Right? It keeps people safer. Like, we control how fast everybody's going, and that way it's like we're controlling some of the chaos that is, the roadways, right? Overall, it prevents accidents more often. However, it doesn't always prevent accidents. Like, even I remember in driving school when I was, getting my license and getting training, like, they would teach you, it's just like, look, if you're on a roadway and everyone is going faster than you are, but you're obeying the speed limit, you're actually the danger. Like, you are actually the dangerous person on the road if you're driving slower than everybody else, even if you're actually going at the speed limit, right? You're presenting a hazard. So it's like, there is this sort of recognition, and it's fascinating because so much of this comes down to being present, paying attention and being present. Like, that's what you have to do to break rules. You have to actually understand the thing that's right in front of you. When you're just following an arbitrary rule, an arbitrary system, as we've discussed in previous podcasts before, systems are just things that they work until they've met a problem that they haven't faced yet. You know what I mean? Or like a book that I remember reading, I can't remember the name of it now, it was by Ken Wilber though, but it was something that a professor had taught him, which was like, any good system is one that lasts long enough to get you to the next system.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, I love that. When you've shared that before, that's a really, really important point.
Yeah, like it's change. Life is change, and we have, if we don't acknowledge that, if we don't accept that things are constantly changing, things might not always hold up nicely to the rules that we have set out. As sort of well designed as they are, they're always systems, and they're always susceptible and vulnerable to the ever-changing conditions of life.
Yes.
Yeah. So rule breakers are really like, you have to be so present-minded to do it. You know what I mean? It's a recognition that it's a recognition of change. It's like, yeah, no, this doesn't work anymore. That's how we've made progress in so many areas. It's just like, well, this is stupid. We can't do this thing anymore. There's a better way to do this now. Right?
So if I could, I'd like to throw out an idea that it's not necessarily, I'd say maybe we don't look at it as like rule breakers. We look at it as rule challengers, people who are willing to challenge these things, because rules are ultimately man-made. They're made and we're flawed, right? Like, even if we develop technology to create rules, we still created the technology. And there's this whole argument with technology that if we create technology that's automated for us, will we inevitably put flaws in it that actually end up causing problems, right? So I think that with all rules, we need to not look at them as black and white. They might be mostly black or mostly white, like mostly one or the other side, but there's a gray area to all rules. And sometimes rules are not only arbitrary or out of date, but they're dumb. They're bad rules. They're actually really, really shitty rules that are like based on biases and racism and all sorts of shit. Like, back in the day in America, there was 2 different sinks, one for white people, one for colored people. Now, if we had that today, people would say that's absolutely nuts. Why would we do that? Right. But yet these stupid rules, they'll come up, you don't have to look far. And then you go, well, that's a stupid rule, but not everyone sees that it's stupid yet. So you're going to need people to challenge that. You're going to need people to go like, hold on a second. Like, and sometimes it's not just people challenging it. It's not like you challenge it and everybody wakes up. It's like you challenge it and you challenge it and you challenge it and you challenge it. And then over time, people begin to see it. And I think, I want to read something because I wrote this the other day. I write every day, as you know. And I wrote this little blurb because I do these little things and I write every day. And I try to write down something that I come across or a thought I have as I philosophize and work through things. But here's my little quote. That's a little bit crude because I just wrote it, but it's about being a critical thinker and being connected to your mind, body, and spirit all at the same time. It's about allowing inner light to guide you and to have faith beyond your very existence so that you can find a deeper meaning and purpose in all that you do, whatever that might be. Now, the whole faith in something more, it's like if you're working on a piece of art, you have to have faith that the story you're telling has something more to it than you even know it has. That you're not just telling the story you think you're telling. You're not just painting the picture you think you're painting. You're not just writing or making the song you think you're making. There's something else in it. There's something unknown. There's this untangible. And even if it's only 1%, but maybe it's even 10 or 20%, but there's something in there that's a discovery, that's an exploration. And I think this conversation is a lot about what's that 10%, what's that 20% or 1%? Like, what is that? And maybe there's magic there, right? And if we open ourselves up to it and we don't be so arrogant to assume that we 100% know black or white what this is, we allow ourselves room to learn, to grow, to discover and expand, which I think is ultimately the biggest goal. And I think really in a lot of ways, Evan, I think that's the point of this podcast is like, we want people to find that little extra bit and expand into their unknown, their potential, their possibility.
Yeah.
And if the rules limit you from that, you got to break them. You got to challenge them.
Yeah. And what can come out of that? Like you don't know until you cross that bridge, until you make that sort of leap, this is kind of providing a nice, almost a nice segue here, for a couple of other elements of this conversation, that we had initially discussed. There was something that, before we move on to that though, that I wanted to touch on, but what the hell was it, Brandon? What the hell was it? The unknown thing. Oh, it was something about that. It was something
extra
about
10%, the extra little bit.
The extra 10%, that little bit. Well, it'll come back. It usually does.
All right.
So yeah, I do want to share this thing because I already mentioned it, just in terms of part of what's inspired this conversation to a certain extent. So, I mean, to any regular listeners, you might be aware of, maybe you're not, but, like I run an acting school. I work with non-actors as well, but, I work with, Meisner technique and help actors, through that technique and in training. And, I've been doing this since like the fall of 2014. Now I've been teaching Meisner and my business is, through that has gone through a number of different changes. And, I recently changed my entire model of the school to pay what you can. And it was something that was an idea that kind of swirled in my head for a number of years, but was based on what I had been learning about business, based on what a number of my teachers and coaches had sort of said. It's like, oh no, you can't do that, right? Like that won't work. And here's all the reasons why. And there's a lot of very good, logical reasons why, for what they were saying. It wasn't a malicious thing, but there was certain aspects about what I was learning that always kind of bothered me. And, a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, I arrived to this decision that I was going to try this thing out, because there was actually nothing that was stopping me from doing it. In terms of being able to do my business that way, other than my own sort of fears around it, fears about whether it would work or not, that it was not something that I had been told could work as a business model. And, it's still early days, but so far I have been so touched and inspired by the response that it has been getting, and by the generosity and trust that it has now created in my business, the people that it's helping me to connect with, and it feels like it's now coming from a completely different place. Like, I find that just in little ways, since I've made this change, there's a degree of honesty that has come, that I've now touched on within myself in this thing, where it's like, I'm no longer, because I'm not putting, well, here's the barrier and the point of entry, and it's an arbitrary number, and here you go, and this is what it is. And don't get me wrong, I understand that not every person can do this, and not every business or person's, livelihood will necessarily allow them to do this. I get that. I'm a service-based business, like it's that allows me a bit of freedom. But I find that what it has done is that I am communicating more honestly with my students. Not that I was being dishonest necessarily. I mean, at least not intentionally, but I find that I am now free in a way that I didn't feel free before. Free to actually teach and talk about the things that I'm genuinely passionate about. I feel more free to acknowledge the things that I'm good at and the things that I'm not good at. To be able to tell students like, well, this is not really why you want to come to me, right? I don't really do that particularly well, or I know a little bit about that, but there's other people who are better at that than I am. So go and see those people. But this is what I do, and this is what I do really well. Is that something that sounds good to you, right? And it's so exciting, and it's so like it is, I'm definitely still in that unknown space, but for me, kind of bringing this back around in terms of that statement I made before, principles in practice. And to a large degree, this was a way that I understood that I could put some of my principles into practice, which is that I feel like we are in a society, particularly in Western society, that is obsessed, has an unhealthy obsession with being a big deal, that has an unhealthy obsession with more, just more. And it's something that I acknowledge that I still deal with, that still like has its clutches in me. And as much as I was mindful about that thing and tried to mitigate that as much as possible prior to this decision, it's something that I realized, like, no, this is a way that I can maybe do something a little bit different that isn't about that. That's really making it about the work that we're doing together, making it about the community that we have together, making it about the connection that we have with each other as the first priority. This is the first priority, and see what happens. Let's see where we can go and what we can do with that. And it's something that, like, I was so nervous and scared about it when I realized that, like, I'd basically already made the decision that I was going to do this. I was like, holy shit, I'm going to do this.
Can you explain like what it is that you did? Cause like, I feel like the way you're talking sounds a little bit cryptic. Like, I mean, you told me.
Did I not mention that it's pay what you can?
I don't
Did
know if you
I
did.
thought I had
I'm not,
mentioned it. Well,
maybe you
basically
did.
yeah, so like it's my school is pay what you can. My classes are pay what you can. My coaching, if you want to coach with me, it's pay what you can. And you know, it's changed the way that I do things. Like I talk to any new person now. Like we have a face-to-face and we have a conversation before we work together. Just to make sure that we're a fit, make sure that it's going to be a good thing, and building a relationship out of trust and having an exchange with each other out of a sense of trust and respect and appreciation for each other. And yeah, like I said, it's early days still with it, but so far I've been so incredibly blown away by the response that I've had so far. That makes me go, maybe this can work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, despite you know all of the advice to the contrary that I've received over the years, I'm like, this could actually potentially work. It's all really based on what it is that you want to do, right? And for myself and what I wanted to do on a bigger level, not simply just based on the numbers of it all, but what do I actually want to do? That this is where I want to lead from. And it was a way that I saw, it was just a place that I saw I can put this into practice in a real way, not just in a philosophical, ideological way in my life, which, you know, a lot of us can get stuck in that space, but actually make it real in some way. And it carries that ideology with it in practice.
Something that comes up for me is the mindset around the whole thing. It's like an abundancy mindset. And I mean, people talk about this whole abundancy or scarcity mindset. And when you talk about, okay, I'm going to do this pay as you can thing, you're going to be confronted with this scarcity mindset or abundancy mindset. And a scarcity mindset is like, well, what if people don't pay enough? Or what if they don't pay really anything? Or what if, you know, this really undervalues me? That's all scarcity thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then abundancy is like, is looking at it, I think, from a different place. And that might be that, like, what if this allows somebody to work with me that otherwise wouldn't be able to work with me? What if what if they actually pay more than what I would want them to do? What if, what if it opens the opportunity for something that wasn't available before? What if this is a new way of doing business? Like, those are all abundancy mindset explorations of the unknown. And I think the thing about, like, rule challenging or rule bending or breaking, however you want to look at it, is like, when you come at it from a place of scarcity, it's all just a big risk, right? But when you come at it from a place of abundance, when you come at it from a place of, like, openness, you look for possibilities. You look for possibilities in the positive. And I think that one of the challenges that is a part of our culture is that we're constantly inundated with this whole idea that we don't have enough, that we need to constantly worry and be in fear about something's going to happen, you know, blah, 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 blah. And it's difficult for people to take a risk, because when you're constantly in this, like, I don't know what's going to happen, and here's all the things that could go wrong, why would you ever venture into the unknown? Whereas if you ventured into the unknown with, like, what's all the things that could go right, you know, and even if some things do go wrong, what if I discover one or two things that could go right? You know, what if I learn something new, you know?
Hey, it's Evan with a quick public service announcement. If you're enjoying the conversation you're hearing and finding it helpful, then please help us and take a second to subscribe to the podcast. And we can all be people helping other people, and that's awesome. Now back to the show. Yeah.
So I think there's this, you know, that's the leap of faith part of it, right? And, these days people don't really in general, I find like to talk about faith because they pair that with maybe religion or something like that. But faith is an incredibly important part of our existence. Like at some point, I think you got to bet on yourself, you know? And I think that if you don't, you're going to get old, or you're going to come to a day where you're going to meet your end, and you're going to be like, I should have bet on myself. So, I think, if you're going to have a heart to heart with yourself, you kind of got to go, okay, what is it going to take for me to bet on me? What's it going to take for me to take a little risk on what's possible, And, I think one of the best things from a business point of view, particularly with a service business, is when you get yourself into demand, all problems go away. And in a large way, part of the challenge is that people, they don't offer value as their primary focus. They try to get value as their primary focus. And this kind of goes back to our last talk. But when you try to get value as your primary focus, there's so many people out there doing that. It doesn't make you special at all. You're just another person trying to get. But if you go out there and you try to offer an incredible amount of value, and that's your focus, and you continually put that out, that actually immediately makes you kind of a rare and special and valuable and important person. And what that does is it puts you into demand. And then once you become in demand, everything's abundance, because everybody wants what's in demand. And we live in Western culture, we live in a supply and demand world. And if there is not a lot of supply of something, and you can give supply, you're special. I mean, it's really that simple. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is that simple. And I think like the thing you're doing right now is interesting, because it's like, well, there's a lot of people right now, and a lot of artists just in general, and they struggle, they go through financial ups and downs. So having a business model like that is really great, because, hey, I'm flush this month. I booked a gig, I'm doing well. I'll pay a little bit more. Next month, I'm struggling. I don't even know how I'm going to stay in class. Okay, but it still works. Do what you can. Do what you can to keep going. And, and when people value something and thing tend to balance out, I think, too, and, the thing is that another side note is like the people who are on takers, who are always trying to get, they tend to get weeded out of the cream of the crop. The people who are constantly giving, the people who keep their word, that hold their value, they tend to rise to the top, at least in like ethical kind of collaborations, where people actually are doing something with generosity, honesty, and abundance. Those people tend to rise to the cream of the crop. So in a certain way, your very system might just end up getting you the cream of the crop type of people. Whether they're the wealthiest or not is kind of irrelevant, because it actually helps them, just kind of have a chance to be people that are trying to, do what they can, which is ultimately all we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. It's, I don't know what to say really at this point, but it's definitely been interesting, and just to actually to touch on a little bit, when you're talking about like abundance, this whole thing of abundance and scarcity, there's probably a lot of people out there who are familiar with this sort of thing. It's definitely big in like the personal development, growth, and business, world, this idea. And yeah, like that was one of those things where it was like, oh, well, by doing this, that was one of the voices that was in my head. It's just like, by doing pay what you can, you are devaluing or undervaluing yourself, right? Which is kind of crazy, because that's not based on any sort of actual number. Like, we don't know that actually is a devaluing or undervaluing of myself, because we haven't actually seen what people are willing to give out of their own sense of what's right. which was another thing that was important to me. I was just like, hey, well, like, what would happen if we became more mindful about what we are exchanging, to really think about it, to rather than it just sort of be like a flat number, but it's just like really, really be mindful about that, what that offering is. But what was I saying? I feel like I've been all over the place. Oh, scarcity, abundance. And yeah, so one of the things was like, it's a devaluing or an undervaluing of yourself. And it's so interesting because when I came to that decision to change everything, I realized it was precisely the opposite. The way I had been doing things was creating a feeling of scarcity, not only for myself, but for other students or for people who potentially wanted to work with me. It was creating the scarcity. It was creating the feeling, which is actually a thing that is actually taught by a lot of business people, is like, you want to create this sense of scarcity because it makes you look special and that kind of shit. And like, I get it, but it was also something where I'm like, yeah, but I don't fucking agree with that. To me, there was something manipulative about that for me. And I didn't want to participate in that either. And maybe for some people it's true. Don't get me wrong. I do think that there are people who, like, particularly if you are in something where you actually provide a product, like you have costs, that you have to account for. And so you have to make sure that you're getting some, because otherwise you will go under, right? Not that I don't have costs, but there's ways that I can control those costs. Not as many people can do that with certain businesses, but so you have to do a certain amount there. But my switch felt like this is creating a sense of abundance for me. Pay what you can really gave me this sense of, actually, no, what I have to offer is of value. And it's given me an even stronger sense of that now. Because I have this sense of, I want to get this work to as many people as I can. Mm-hmm. Because I believe in it so much. And I believe that people will also see it that way as well. I think people will also see it as valuable. And through that, we will find a relationship together that works for everybody.
It's like with business and service business particularly, like there's also so much dynamic elements to it all. And as an artist, it's the same way. Like, there's actors, for example, who, they could make, film a few million, if not more, per picture. But then they'll go and they'll do this film where they'll take almost nothing, or they'll take like just, thousands or tens of thousands, or maybe even 100,000, just so they can do a film that they really believe in, right? They'll do this because what's more important is getting that movie made or being a part of that movie than it is to make the money. And I think that it doesn't all have to be so black and white. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I mean, like if you end up getting so many clients that want to be a part of your pay what you can program, I mean, you probably will hit a point where you go, okay, well, I can only do so much before like no one else can really kind of come into this, because like, and I'm only willing to give X amount of time to teaching per week, because as important of a mission as it is of what you're building, I mean, it's still important that you have some time for yourself to go down to the beach, to read a book, to meditate, to do all this other stuff. And you're, like if your whole life becomes, I'm just going to teach other people this thing, I mean, maybe you want to do that, but maybe you don't. So then scarcity in it becomes a natural thing where there's just not enough space. And I think that you can have like a tier system where, you have the pay what you can. And then if you really want to add anything else, you can say, okay, well, look, I put together this package and it's a standardized price to do this thing. You know, it's a intensive, or it's this thing. And if you want to do it, this is what it is. But if you want to do this, it's pay what you can. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
there's all sorts of options. I mean, I think what's important here, and why I'm saying this, is that we don't need to be so rigid. We can be flexible. We can be open, and we can change as we go along. It doesn't always, like, just because you make a decision or you try something doesn't mean that you're stuck in that forever. And I think what's really important for people to keep in mind is that, you know, you don't have to get so locked into everything. You know, there's room. There's a dynamic and explorative part of figuring this stuff out for yourself. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, I think it's cool what you're doing. I mean, I definitely, you know, when you told me kind of what you were doing, I saw what you were doing. I was like, ooh, I don't know. I have to say, like, you know what? I mean, but, you know, I was thinking about that actually, funny enough, yesterday, as I was taking the elevator down from my building, and I was just thinking, like, I wonder if that can work. You know what I mean? Like, and it was nice to hear you share that today, and hear that people were not only willing to just kind of pay what they can, was to pay exactly what you had normally asked for before, or even pay more. I thought that was really a beautiful thing. And the thing is that, yeah, it's like we can get locked into these ideas, and we've never tested them. We've never tried them. I want to say one other thing about what you're doing. You know, it's kind of the sum is more than its parts kind of thing. And it kind of goes from the last conversation we had about collaboration, where the value that you end up building might be something unexpected. It might be something that you don't see. And maybe you create an incredible amount of trust with your clients that other service-based businesses just don't. I know, for example, I work with one coach, and I think he does an incredible job at creating systems and creating dynamics and stuff like this. But I would say that from a group perspective, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of trust in the group for him necessarily. I wouldn't say that people are really loyal to it. Whereas I've worked with other coaches who they spend a lot more time on building the community element. And it isn't that one is better than the other, but they do different things. And, you know, I think I lean a little bit, maybe this is just because of my values, but I lean a little bit more towards, I want the trust. I want to build something where there's like a loyalty, right? And it really just depends on what you value, because I'm talking a lot here, but I want to say, like, in the business of things, you have turnover and there's a burn rate. Now, just to kind of give people an explanation of this, because I think all artists need to really understand business practices. The burn rate is, if you have, say, 100 clients, you got to expect that over the course of a year, there's probably going to be a 25% burn rate on average, if you're doing a good job, which means that 25% of your clients, 25 out of 100 clients, are not going to be working with you the next year, most likely. So you got to expect a 25% burn rate. Now, if you have a high burn rate, that means you have to get more clients more often. And if you have a low burn rate, you have less clients to have to acquire. But even if you're making, say, less money from a lower burn rate, it's actually a lot easier work for you, because you're not trying to replace the burn rate of the lost clients all the time. Whereas if you have a high burn rate, you might be making more money per client, but you have to do a lot of work to continue to get more clients. And if we were to pair this over to art, right? Let's just pair it over to the film world. If you work on a film and people love working with you, you're going to have a low burn rate on your team, meaning that they're probably going to rehire you, want to work with you again, meaning that you're not going to have to look for work so much. But if those people pay you less, you might not be making as much money. Maybe, let's just say I'm using this example, but you don't have to look for work as much. Whereas you could have a high burn rate where you're constantly working with different people. Maybe they pay you more, but you always are in the state of looking for work. So different value system, different approach. It's not one's right or better, but I think we need to be open-minded that you can hybrid it. You can work in one, work in the other. There's options is what I'm saying. There's options. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Let's take a quick beer break. I'm drinking a Mountaineer Pilsner. I feel like Pilsners we've been drinking a lot of these recently, both you and I. And this one's from Whistler Brewing Company. I think it's a kind of a new one. I've never seen it on the shelves before. So I picked one up, and it's great. It's really good. As far as Pilsners go, just enough flavor to it, but it's super crisp and refreshing, and it's got a nice clean finish to it. I don't know. I honestly don't know what more you could ask for in a Pilsner.
Sounds good. Guess what kind of beer I'm drinking?
Tell me, Brandon.
It's a Pilsner. This is from Hoyne Brewing. It's just called the Hoyne Pilsner. It's great. It's very tasty. One thing I do notice about it is that I don't find it as bubbly as a lot of beers, but it's nice. It's kind of gives it a bit of a smoothness. I don't know if I'm noticing that or not, but anyway, I feel like sometimes also like you have a beer and on different days you want a certain type of beer and you're like, I love this beer, but it's like also I love this beer today. It's the perfect beer today. And anyway, this is a great beer for today. I'm super happy with it. But yeah, we have been drinking a lot of Pilsners. Obviously, we didn't organize that and we both grabbed Pilsners. So it seems to be a trend.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Well, yeah, let's wrap it up. I think we've talked about some pretty cool things. Let me go first.
All right.
I'm just going to say this is like, I probably reiterate this in most episodes we do, but I mean, for all our listeners, like my wish for you is that you'll go out in your life and you'll bet on yourself, that you'll take a risk on yourself, that you'll go try some things, that you'll entertain some of your wild ideas, and that I would implore you not to do it for self-serving, selfish reasons. And I want to caveat that by saying it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to be self-serving, but try to look at it from terms of like, yeah, okay, this is what I want, but what can I give? What can I offer? What can I do? And try to entertain doing something different in the way that you give, And I think that sometimes people don't realize that there is this incredible arena that you enter when you get into the state of giving, when you get into the state of offering value, not necessarily to get anything, but just to try to put your mark on the world, is to say like, I can be of value. I can offer value. I can help someone. I can do something good in the world. And you might not see immediate results from doing that. But if you start doing that, incredible things can happen. And to give you a personal anecdote about this for myself, the very first class I ever did, I taught people how to make a film. And I said 21 people, and I said, they actually asked me if I would teach how to make a film in this group that I was involved in. And I said, I'll do it, but I have a couple things. You don't have to pay, but what you have to do is I want every day or every week, because it was once a week, I want you to give me a little bit of feedback on how that class went. And you have to show up every class and you have to finish your film. Like you have to follow through and do the work, and you will finish your film. And they all did. And we did a big screening and all that stuff. But I did it for free, and I said the exchange is feedback. You show up and you do it. That was the exchange. It wasn't money. It's just, and this is like, it's all things they wanted anyway. but I said, this is what you got to do. And everybody said they agreed. And actually one person joined halfway through. And the whole class said to them, if you join us halfway through this, because they were like, can you please let me in? They were like, you have to not only make up all the work we've done, but you have to like also complete what we're doing. And this person did. And it was incredible. And I'll tell you something, the next month, the first paid class or the first few paid classes I did, I made 12 grand just from doing classes. And then the next month I made 24 grand. And this was in a month. I made $36,000 within 2 months after doing a class entirely for free. So the power of giving is so incredible, because the reason why I made I felt like a pretty decent amount of income for me, especially at the time, was that everybody told their friends. Everyone was like, this was awesome. I made my film. Everyone got to show their film. They got to do the thing. And everyone was like, can I get in the class? And then I had to do like 3 classes a week just to accommodate all the people that wanted in. So, giving your value and not worrying so much about what you get is a really important thing. But caveat on that, it does not mean that you don't hold people accountable. It does not mean that you don't ask for something. Sometimes it's not money that you need in exchange, but it's commitment, or it's, I need feedback, or I need something. But like, don't, especially when you're doing a service, try to look at it as an exchange as opposed to a one-way transaction, because everything is a two-way transaction. Even if you're not getting a lot personally out of it, you're giving them something to give, because when you don't let people give you something back, you actually do them a disservice. Mm-hmm. That's why often if you're in line, I don't know if this has ever happened to people, but someone will buy someone a coffee ahead of them. The next person, like I think they've done tests on this, is like 90% of the time or 80% of the time buys a coffee for the next person. So it doesn't benefit the person in front, but it creates a chain reaction. Now, eventually chain reaction stops. Sometimes it stops immediately, but sometimes it goes on for a long time. So there is this beautiful thing when you open yourself up to that. So yeah, I mean, it kind of breaks the rule. It kind of challenges the rule. So that's what I want to wrap up with for myself, Evan. What do you got?
Yeah, it's interesting. You've just brought up what you just did. It's like that whole thing of like if you give, you shall receive. Try and remove a lot of the religious connotations from that if you can, but and just see it as like maybe there's just some sort of a perennial truth to this whole notion, but the giving has to be complete. It's a complete giving. It's not, because I don't think you can game that one. But it's that whole notion. I think a lot of us can nod our heads and agree to it, but it's like, again, it's like, how is there a place where you can put that into practice? Is there a way where you can just shift your priorities a little bit to where your focus is more on what you're giving than what you're receiving? Because I think when you can start to actualize it, as I'm starting to discover, is that when you begin to actualize it, you begin to actually see how that's true. And what you receive, what I've been receiving has been beyond just any kind of monetary compensation for my services. What I've been receiving has been clarity in what I'm doing, renewed passion in what I'm doing. As I was saying, like just kind of a discovering of a new kind of honesty, where I'm not trying to present myself as something that I'm not anymore. Like we do that in such small and subtle little ways where we try and give this image off to people about what we are. And I'm not sitting here saying that like, yes, I've now completely broken down all of those, egotistic, walls and barriers and masks and stuff. But I know that some of them have come down through this process, and that was completely unexpected. There's so many unexpected things that I've received so far in this process. And I'm so encouraged to just keep on taking these little steps, these little leaps of faith that they're coming from somewhere deeper inside of myself, because that's the only way I made this decision to begin with, because my logical brain was telling me that that's not a good idea, and it's been telling me that's not a good idea for a long time. But there was a part of me that's been saying all of this time, it's like, no, that's a really good idea. Try it. See what happens. Just see what happens. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.